Welcome, fellow travelers. Your traveling buddy here, coming today from Marshall, Michigan. And I stand in front of this house right here. It's called the Honolulu House, right here in Marshall. It's a famous historical house, and they agreed to take us on the tour right here. So travel with us, will you?
Well, welcome to the Honolulu House, which is a truly unique historical treasure. It's a building that currently is restored to its Victorian glamour of the 1880s, but was originally built in 1860 by a man who had been the Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court and was appointed to go to Honolulu as the U.S. Consul to what was then called the Sandwich Islands. And his name was Abner Pratt, and he spent 2 years in Honolulu and just loved it. But when he came back to Michigan, he tried to live here in Marshall as he had in Honolulu, and he built this house in the style of houses that he knew there. And so it's a mixture of multiple architectural styles with a lot of Polynesian influences. The third owner of the house in the 1880s was a flamboyant character who was the mayor of Marshall at the time, named Martin Wagner. And Wagner updated the house in a high Victorian style, and with the main feature are wonderful decorative wall and ceiling paintings done by a painter originally from Lansing named F.A. Grace. Grace spent several years in the house painting these wonderful designs that utilize more than 200 colors and are a mixture of things, including an homage to the industrial age, because lots of things look like they're screwed or bolted to the walls or ceiling when it's actually all flat paint. There's no wallpaper on this level, and it's just a wonderful example of Victorian style.
Look at that. 14-foot ceilings. Look at that skylight up there. Wow.
The beautiful staircase, curved staircase that you can actually walk underneath, which is unusual, essentially goes to nowhere. There's no upstairs bedrooms or anything, just some storage space, but access to the roof in an observation deck. Now, if you were in Honolulu and wanted to look over the sea for incoming ships, it all makes sense.
Right, but so here...
this is maybe for show.
Wow. And these paintings, like you said, in a Polynesian form. Look at that, that's beautiful.
Well, yeah. Beautiful. The 1880s painter sort of got rid of most of the Polynesian decoration. The only real panel that's left from the 1860 painting is this one up here.
Oh, that one right there.
That one right
all
there.
The rest is 1880. Well, almost all the rest of it.
Wow, that is cool. That is nice. Look at that.
Now there's a formal and this is called the formal parlor. Again, the key feature is the wall and ceiling paintings.
Wow.
That have a variety of figures, and some people have found stories to tell in there of what they're remembering of characters. There's some profiles of a man and a woman And some people have interpreted that as Romeo and Juliet. Some of the characters on the wall are, some people can say it's the mask of comedy and tragedy on two of the sides.
Wow. That's
A
beautiful.
Polynesian influence is that the windows are 10 feet tall and open from the bottom to allow the tropical breezes to come in and cool the house.
That's cool.
So much.
And is this the owner right there?
No, that is a picture of a man named Lucius Lyon.
Lucius Lyon, from Grand Rapids.
And he's
Oh.
a surveyor,
Yep.
and he's significant in Michigan's history because he negotiated the deal where Michigan wanted to first claim the Toledo area as part of the state, and were ready to almost attack Ohio over it.
Ah,
But
yeah.
instead, they worked out a deal that Michigan got the UP, and Toledo stayed in Ohio.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Well, he's the one who helped make the deal. In the 1880s, we found 2 mills in Pennsylvania that were able to reproduce the carpeting. The piano is unusual in that it's a square grand piano made in New York in the 1850s
Wow.
with mother of pearl keys.
Oh, look at that.
Original. God, this has got to be worth a lot of money.
Originally, there were 11 marble fireplaces in the house. But Mayor Wagner in the 1880s did what was fashionable at the time and put in these slate fireplaces that are painted to look like marble. And you can tell they're painted because if you look underneath here, it's solid black and not the faux finish.
Wow.
Wood, Mayor Wagner found this wood in the attic here and had it sent to Paris, where these wind mirror frames were made, and so they
It had to be expensive. Send it to Paris. So my.
Yeah.
And probably the most interesting feature of this room is the light fixture, which was a gift to Mayor Wagner by the citizens of Marshall. And it's unusual because originally the lights that faced up were gas and the ones that faced down were electric. Electricity was available in Marshall by the late 1880s, but it didn't operate all the time. So you could have electricity when it was available and gas lighting at other times.
Wow. And who's this picture
That is
over
a
here?
portrait of Isaac Prairie, who's important that he was Michigan's first congressman. He was also the law partner at first of Judge Pratt, who built this house, and later Pratt's son-in-law that he married after his first wife died. He married Pratt's daughter, Bologna, and actually lived across the street in the house that's now a bank building.
Oh, okay.
But this house, when Prairie lived across the street, this house didn't exist here.
Here we are in the dining room.
This is the formal dining room with, again, wonderful wall and ceiling decorations. It almost looks like the whole center part of the ceiling is screwed in place.
But it's actually painting.
It's all
Paint.
flat paint.
It looks
Black
like
paint.
nails or screws, but it's actually painted on. Wow.
That is beautiful.
Now you said that's an artist from Lansing?
His name was F.A. Grace.
I'll have to look that up because I'm from Lansing.
And he's known to have done several other
I wonder if he did any
Works around
painting
the
in the
country.
Capitol or something.
A feature of this room is the china setting, which was presented to a man from Marshall named Charles Gorham, who was prominent as a banker, but he was also very active in Republican politics. And he served as the U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands in the 1870s. And when his tenure ended in 1875, the Dutch government presented him this china as a thank you gift.
Wow.
And recently, a descendant of his donated a significant quantity of the china. A few pieces had been given to the Marshall Historical Society previously, but more than 200 pieces were donated several years ago by another man named, also named Charles T. Gorham.
So ballroom dress.
The dress was worn by Gorham's wife Susan in the 1870s when she served as the wife of the ambassador.
Oh, she was kind of short, wasn't she? Or was that just because of the thing that's sitting on?
I think people in general were smaller.
Yeah, they were smaller.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm like,
Beautiful dress.
she looked, she's a lot smaller than me if that was the, I guess, you gotta see how it drapes on the floor, but,
Yep.
Wow, that's cool. It's just incredible, that paint job, he said.
Yeah. Man, it gets.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to look at this old clock.
And nowadays, they just build houses in like 6 months and they're up already.
Slave catchers from Kentucky came to Marshall to recapture the Crosswhite family that were escaped slaves from Kentucky, but they lived openly in Marshall. There were about 50 African-American residents in Marshall at the time, some runaway slaves, some free people. And when the slave catchers were identified and were surrounding the cabin of the Crosswhite family, more than 100 local citizens came to defend the Crosswhites. Mm-hmm. And the Crosswhites escaped and eventually went to Canada and didn't return till after the Civil War, and the slave catchers were at first arrested. And later the charges didn't stick, and so the slave owner then sued all the citizens in Marshall and won the suit. And so the people in Marshall had to pay fines for having prevented the capture of the Crosswhite family. And that was there were a lot of incidents like that of slave catchers in the North, and that friction, whether or not slaves were considered property in the North, was one of the big controversies at the time, and that led to the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which in a sense enhanced slave owners' rights and was sort of part of the friction that led to eventually to the Civil War. Though I make that point to say that Marshall was a railroad center, and certainly escaped slaves got here, and if you could get to Marshall, you could get on a train and get to Detroit and then get across the river to Canada. But there was a period in Marshall that they obviously weren't hiding, that escaped slaves lived openly in the community. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of places and towns that have something they think is a tunnel or a room that could have been a thing, but I've never seen any real, for sure, documentation that it was used as part of the Underground Railroad. It would have existed, it would have been here, but as I said, there was a period where it really wouldn't have been needed to be underground, that you could get to Marshall and live openly and weren't bothered.
That's cool.
With a wood Kalamazoo stove that has a waffle iron that turns, and you can control the level of heat by how many of these compartments are open. And obviously things can go in here, and there's that area. And then there's a variety of peelers, grinders, cherry pit
Candle
removers.
That's a candle maker.
Candle makers.
Candle maker.
Yeah, crimpers, just all kinds of things that would have been in a house like this.
Of course, got get old Kellogg is props. Kellogg's cornflakes. That's cool.
There's a churn over there.
Wow. That's beautiful. So it was basically a man cave.
This would have been warmer in the winters and cooler in the summers. And here's the family dining room.
Wow.
This is one of the last of the original marble fireplaces that were throughout the house in the 1860s and up until the 1880s.
Wow.
That is beautiful.
And I made a couple references to the last owner, Mrs. Bullard, and this is the woman. This is a picture of the woman who started out. She was an orphan from Battle Creek and became a maid to the Bullards, and she stayed with Mrs. Bullard as her companion throughout Mrs. Bullard's life. Her name is Jessie Graham, and Jessie did that picture of the Honolulu house.
Wow.
And she inherited most of Mrs. Bullard's possessions, and and then 10 years later, when this opened as a house museum, she said Mrs. Bullard's china belonged back here, so she donated.
Oh,
Mrs.
that's
Bullard's
incredible.
china here, and so it's displayed here, and there's more in the cabinet over there.
That's incredible. I was like, you know, especially being an African American woman, you know, back in that time, I'm like, to be donated, left all this stuff.
And so here, and we'll go into the kitchen in a moment, but it's furnished in things, we don't know what here was originally, but we have artifacts from the late 1800s, early 1900s that would have things like that. But a couple things that are interesting. Here is a high chair. I don't know if I do it right.
Wow. Oh. So it's like a stroller.
It's like a stroller.
Oh, now that is cool.
So you can buy things sort of like that today, but
Yep.
it
Just made better back then.
That is cool.
areas that weren't carpeted. And I just went ahead about the restoration work and saving the plaster. In this room, in this room, the paintings were so damaged, the plaster was so damaged, the restoration really wasn't possible. So the original design was documented, and most of the room was replastered, and then the painting was reproduced as it had been there originally. So this is the only room there's a copy of what was there before and not a restoration of the original. As I said, that the Pratts were not in good health when they returned to Marshall from Honolulu, and Judge Pratt tried to live here as he had in Honolulu, and he only wore tropical clothing. He was re-elected to the state legislature.
Learned the winter wasn't a good idea for that.
Well, that may have been his downfall because he died of pneumonia in 1863. And his wife had died in 1861. And they had this house decorated in tropical themes and had lots of items that they had brought back from Honolulu. But no one wanted that stuff. And so everything was sold in an estate sale. And so there's nothing. Initially, the Historical Society had nothing that belonged to the Pratts, but we've been able to acquire two things. This sofa, it's been reupholstered, but it was originally in this house in the 1860s and owned by the Pratts. And the other interesting thing is this shipping trunk that's apparently made out of Kona wood. And it says A. Pratt, Marshall, Michigan on the top. So this must have been one of the trunks that the Pratts used in 1859 when they returned to Marshall.
Wow.
Now I mentioned there are no bedrooms here because initially the bedroom wings, one of them, there were two on each side, and this doorway would have led to a connecting corridor to to the bedroom wing. And then part of it's the tropical features, because the heat during the day would build up in the house, and you wanted the place to sleep being cooler, so the bedrooms would be shut off, and you'd use them at night. And this is Abner and Eliza Pratt, who had the house built in 1860. Now, the Historical Society is considering restoring the bedroom wings, and here's an architect's concept design of what the back of the house would look like if these bedroom wings were restored.
Oh, okay.
So the project hasn't been approved, and we don't have the money yet, but that's something that the Historical Society Board is considering pursuing. This room has probably had a variety of purposes over the years. It's not carpeted like the other rooms. The oak floors are probably from the 1920s, at a time when a widow lived here with her maid, who became her companion over time. But there's some interesting things in the room. The second owner of the home after the Pratts were the Camerons. And this is a picture of Carolyn Cameron and her daughter Carrie. And Carrie wore, this is Carrie's wedding dress. And on her wedding day, after the church ceremony, she came over here and climbed up the steps, so that the wedding party then came over here, and she was able to descend the stairway steps in this wedding.
Wow. That's cool.
That's awesome.
Even though there's nothing up there.
And again, the third owner of the house who made the major changes was Martin Wagner, and this is a picture of Wagner.
There's Martin Wagner.
And this is his desk, and this is a ledger from his companies. He was best known for making a fortune with the Voltaic Electric Belt Company. That you could, it was aggressively mail ordered, and it was like an electric belt that ran around, and it was designed to cure all kinds of
One of those
medical problems
quackery type things. Okay.
And the desk is unusual in that you can sit on either side, so it was a partner desk.
Yeah, see there's little doors
Chairs
here.
and drawers on both.
Yeah, see the little doors there,
sides.
yeah. That's cool.
Now, a little bit about a history of the house. As I said, there were 4 owners. The first were Abner and Eliza Pratt, and he was the one who came from Honolulu and built the house. Then there were the Camerons, and then the Wagners, and the Wagners made the significant changes to the house. And after the Wagners died in the late 1800s, and in 1901 the house was owned by the Bullard family. And Mr. Bullard lived about another 20 years, and then from about 1920 on, his widow lived here with a woman named Jessie Graham, who had been her maid and sort of became her companion. But the house deteriorated over that time and years with a lot of water damage, and there had been changes to the house made of the bedroom wings were torn off, as you won't see any existing bedrooms currently, and so rooms had different purposes. There was wallboard put up, wallpaper, painting, and kind of stuff, and the things had deteriorated. Mrs. Bullard died in 1951, and the place was empty. And at that time, the east-west street was US 12, the north-south street was US 27. It was a very busy intersection, and oil companies were looking for locations for gas stations.
Oh, and they wanted this property, didn't they?
And so there was concern that this house would be demolished. And the leading citizen of Marshall in the 1900s is a man named Harold Brooks, and there's many things in town that Mr. Brooks was involved in. And as he had done with other buildings, he bought this to save it. So he bought it from the Bullard estate to keep anything bad from happening to it, and held on to it about 10 years until a deal was made that the Marshall Historical Society would reorganize and make this its headquarters and turn it into a house museum. And that's what happened. But the house was really in pretty poor shape by then. And over time, a restoration effort began, and nationally known restoration experts were consulted. And the first thing that was done was a process was developed to stabilize the plaster. And actually a solution was invented that could be injected into the hardened plaster so it could be softened enough to reattach to the lath.
Oh.
And so the sagging, broken plaster was repaired as much as possible. And then restoration artists then documented the paintings. And then beginning in the late 70s and going into the mid 80s, almost everything was repainted, and exactly the way, and research was done on the original colors, and there were more than 200 colors identified in all of these paintings. And so that was redone, and then in 2013 there was a second restoration of the paintings and a touch-up to bring them,
Clean them up.
because there had been additional cracking and settling of the house, which is a continuous effort
Right.
to try to keep everything stable. And it's interesting that a local artist named Michael Peck led the 2013 restoration work, and he had been an apprentice in the 1980s on the original project.
Wow.
Now we'll go into this room, the informal parlor. If you were a guest in the house and not staying for dinner or anything, and you were just stopping by, you would be brought into this room. Again, wonderful wall and ceiling paintings with lots of gold. And, yeah.
Wow.
Two more full finish fireplaces, but it's a chance to tell the history of Marshall with the two portraits that are brothers named Sidney and George Ketchum. Sidney here on the right and George on the left. And Sidney was a resident of New York State who in 1830 wanted to start a town in Michigan because the Michigan Territory was opening up to settlement. And at that time, if you lived in New York State, you could get to Detroit fairly easily because you could go up the Hudson River to the Erie Canal to Buffalo and get a steamship and come across Lake Erie. So he got to Detroit and he connected with a land agent, and they rode across southern Michigan, and he was looking for a place to start a town. And he found the confluence of the Kalamazoo River with Rice Creek and said this is where he wanted to start his town. So during the warm weather months of that year, he was able to attain the land rights for most of the land that's now the city of Marshall. Part he got from government grants, and part he got from buying out or trading, making trades with other people. So he went back to New York State, and then the next spring, he came with his brother George, who's pictured over here on the left, and their parents, Seth and Lydia, are the two portraits at the end, and Seth was a Civil War veteran who, a Revolutionary War veteran, and the only one buried in the local cemetery. But in addition to them, they brought a group of people that were sort of hand-picked to help start a town and had the different skills. You know, a shoemaker and a blacksmith and a teacher and a doctor, and and just so you could sort of instantly start a town. And Sidney was more of the business person. He had the land, and he started the first hotel, and he opened the first bank. And George was the builder. He built a sawmill initially. That's the first thing he did, and was able then to start so they could start constructing houses right away.
That's cool.
And so Marshall, it gave way that Marshall really grew up early in Michigan's history.
Wow.
Wow. Alright, fellow travelers, that's about it here for the Honolulu house. That was great. Got to learn a lot of stuff that I never knew. You know, a lot of information in there. You know, I never knew that Marshall was in line to be the capital at one time. You know, I've heard of Mesa, Michigan, but never Marshall. That's interesting, you know, all that information. That's why I like history. I learn something new every day. So, that's about it. So, if you like this, hit that like button. Share, subscribe. Any comments for me? Leave me a comment. Any ideas for me to do? Let me know. I just might show up and do it. So, until next time, my fellow travelers, I'll see you around the mitten.